Okay, so hi, Paul. Just right from the get-go, for the people who don't know your brand, can you tell us a bit about what you're doing with Hunchback Music?
Right. So Hunchback Music is specified in making campaign music. That's kind of how we sell it. Trailer music, in particular, game trailers and movie trailers. Although we do much more than that. So it's not only that, we have labels as well. We do in-game music as well and sound implementation. Although we have seen that it's just better to kind of start with apples and say like, okay, you sell trailer music campaigns, mostly on the cinematic part. And after that, we when people are kind of in that area, we have clients in that area, then they discover that we do a little bit more. That's kind of what Hunchback does.
Okay, got it. And what would be, as a CEO of the company, what would be your tasks, or what would be your field of responsibilities there?
So I started as a composer. So the whole idea and the whole discipline and how deep you go into music production is something that I hold very close to the heart. It's something that we are passionate about and not just run as a business. It's kind of started as a passion project. After that, we just saw that specifically as a composer for campaigns, that a lot of music that you pitch, for example, or a lot of music that you create for trailers or production music kind of ends up in these very secret libraries that are kind of never been shown. So after that, we said like, okay, can we create something that does a little bit more with that? So even if it doesn't work out with the pitch or it doesn't work out with this production music, that it still sees the light of day, or you can still use it as your portfolio. And there kind of we started these labels as well to say like, okay, not only we use it for an industry release, which is kind of containing music for all this production stuff and maybe pitches, but then also give it a proper release. And not also that, like great, like we have a nice compilation with good composers, specified the trailers, but then also give composers a little bit more of a podium. So we started this YouTube thing and we said like, okay, let's talk with composers about trailers. Let's talk with composers about the industry itself and their experiences in it. And then even do Composer Explain. And that is still something that we are working on, that will come. We'll release that soon. Just to give it a little bit more of a face to the composer and not just be a company that has a lot of cool placements and we talk about that. We kind of wanted to make it a collective where you can actually see who you work with. You can hear the backstory of the composer. And that's through not a traditional interview, but more of a very entertaining way to react on trailers, to maybe have like a little explanation video, or just simple a podcast where it started off to be talking about the music industry and maybe we end up talking about deep philosophy and what happens after that.
And then if I recall correctly, on your website, you've got like these multiple of these music labels you are running, like sub labels, so to say. Which kinds of music are you into? What kind of music are you producing for these different labels?
So back in the day, I was very much into underground electronic music, and it kind of started off like that, like most kids at my age, like being a DJ, starting off with some techno beats and developing kind of the skill also from music production to electronic music. So there is this whole electronic scene, techno, melodic techno, is just something very close to the heart. Something we love, and lots of our composers have had a similar experience with that. So that's one of the labels that we have. Another label is a little bit more on film music, especially film music that has been released under a movie, but then never had a proper release. And we said, why didn't we give it a second life and say, okay, great that it's been placed. Kind of this is a reverse sync almost. So we say, okay, this is greatly done for this movie. Can we get kind of the rights to release it properly? And then maybe even give it a third life by syncing it for something else. So that's more cinema. So soundtracks for games and for movies. It can even be small movies as well. Indie movies that are very tiny, where they maybe made five tracks for this album. And sometimes it's like a bigger one where you have 50 tracks of like a soundtrack. And of course, like on the Hunchback label, we release a little bit more of the cinematic stuff. So more the trailer stuff is all on the Hunchback parts, or at least the label we call Hunchback. Most of the things that we release will all be Hunchback, just with a little bit of a different label name. it's just a way to sell things a little bit better. So when you release classical music, cinematic music, game music, trailer music, chill hop, electronic music, and it's all under the same name, then people are like getting a little confused.
Yeah.
So we try to just label it correctly so people can kind of identify what they're looking out for. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's great to be like a jack of all trades, or being able to produce different kinds of music with your composers, or you yourself as a composer, but having it sorted out and sorted into different categories if you want. This would make it much easier for people who are searching for music for their projects, I guess.
Yeah, I think what you're saying as well, even in Hunchback itself, if we do trailer music, we do these themes. This is kind of conventional themed albums. So one is more epic, one is more horror, one is more sci-fi, and then we kind of identify there as well a little bit. It's just people like to label things. If it's up to us, and we say to all the composers, people can say whatever they want or whatever they want to identify the music with. It's just nice to steer them in a certain direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess if clients come up to you and you have like a big back catalog of music you can like offer, this would also help like companies or people who want to put something out but don't have like a big budget for commissioned work, I guess, right?
Yeah, so what you can do is like you have these pitches. It can also be custom work straight to us where they say, okay, we want this because we know that you guys are good at X and Y. Mm-hmm. It can also be where one of these custom IDs are quite of one of the production music that we have, or one of the trailer songs that we already pre-created it, could be a good fit. A lot of times we actually create something custom. So sure, really depending on the budget, sometimes it's huge budgets, sometimes it's smaller budgets. We kind of see what we can work with. So if you are an indie game company and you don't have a lot of money for a trailer, then we always try to make it work. There's of course a little bit of a baseline, but I always say to every company and every small and big, like, just tell me what is kind of comfortable to you, and definitely let us prove that we can do it.
Okay.
So the collaboration always comes first. And after that, like I always say to everybody, just let us prove it. If you don't believe it, or you're like skeptical about something, then just let us dive into it. We will show. I'm very confident that our group of composers actually can get it done. Awesome. But it's always on the clients to dedicate or to decide that if they really like it, they're satisfied.
I see. How many, by the way, how many composers are working for you, including yourself?
I think it's kind of like growing as well. Then again, like we work with a lot of composers on freelance basis. Then we only hire composers and sound designers if there's long-term projects. So that's kind of more of the synergy between my game company, where, of course, we're working on long-term big projects that could be for 2 years, 3 years, even 4 years. Then you can actually have a dedicated composer, dedicated sound designer. Even implementation can be a thing. But I think around 25 composers. Oh, okay. And everybody has kind of different styles in what they're good at. Some have a little bit more of the similar style, which is like the epic hybrid composer. And we have somebody that's way better at orchestration and I'll call it like Pixar music. Animation music is very flamboyant way of music. And some people are better at different styles. So not in the cinema realm, but they're way better at electronic techno music. And then you have somebody that's way better at sound design, ambient music. Although if somebody asks, can we do like a rom-comedy? That will be quite hard. I think we can pull it off, but it's not something that we resonate with very well. Or let's say they ask for some reggaeton beats. Yeah, could be. I think we could be, but it's not really in our field of interest that much.
Yeah. I think as composers, we can kind of like emulate certain styles or certain music genres, but there's definitely limits to that, I guess. And there's always, for each composer is a field of music or a genre of music that one is stronger in than say like you just said, reggaeton music or techno music or stuff. So I think it's good to have a broad team of people who can do different things, but also be like realistic with the stuff you can do and you would maybe delegate.
it's going to some borders. So if somebody asks us for this kind of raw hip hop, almost going into drill, we actually could do it. It's closer to electronic music in that sense. It's kind of it depends on the project. So when we say this actually is our tone of voice, I know there's like sometimes they would ask something where it's like, hey, I know these other guys, this other company, they are perfect for this role. If it's more of this like poppy. I think sometimes we could do it. It just depends if it's the right fit. Does the atmosphere or the brand actually hit our interests? Then we would choose to do it. And if it's too far out of the field and we actually know somebody, then we probably pass on it and give it to the other one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You were just talking about your game development company. I think it's called. Excuse me if I'm pronouncing it right. Is it KeoKen?
Yeah, you actually said it right. KeoKen Interactive. Yes.
KeoKen Interactive. Okay, so you're not only the CEO of Hunchback Music, but you're also the co-director of KeoKen Interactive, which is an indie game company. If I'm correct, yeah.
Yeah, you're saying it right.
Okay. Could you tell us a bit about KeoKen Interactive as a company and what your role as a co-director is in that company?
So I think 8 years ago, I started these companies with my brother. And we said like, okay, let's create these big adventure games, mainly because you have one big one in the Netherlands called Guerrilla. We said, why is that kind of the only one that makes games on that scale from the Netherlands? So, well, let's try it. And since we had a little bit more of a background in music and in games, and we were kind of making little home videos in our back garden when we were children, recording kind of our own version of Star Wars, our own version of 007. So we were doing some James Bond, and we were doing all these like hacky things to create these productions. So I think it was somewhere in our blood to go into this field of storytelling. And it didn't matter. We could have been painters in that sense. But then again, we went for a more technology way where we say, hey, why not make movies? Why not make games? And music as well. We thought that was also a very interesting point, or very important to us to tell the story. So it was the visual appearance and it was like the auditorial experience. And then we said, let's combine that into one kind of art project, which is games. Mm-hmm. And especially nowadays, like we love this whole cinematic kind of way of telling or making games. So that already has a lot of synergy with movies as well. So I think all like the disciplines combined came to be that we also wanted to start a game company. And we are doing this for 8 years now.
Amazing. And I think one of the first big projects you worked on with KeoKen Interactive was a game called Deliver Us the Moon, right?
Yeah. So that was our debut game. That took a long way. So even from becoming an entrepreneur, running a company, letting people go at a certain point, dealing with kind of your work-life balance, was all stamped in kind of the development of that game. Learning how to deal with publishers. This is not the same as kind of music publishers, a little bit different. Making deals in a certain way, making all the connections, going to conferences. That kind of led to it. And especially in the beginning, if you talk about roles, you are exactly the jack of all trades. You become the producer, the creative director, you become the narrative writer, you become the level designer. And eventually we learned very fast that we should find people that are better than us, people that can actually take over the discipline and tell us what to do. And that's kind of what we still do. That's still our way of running the companies. So KeoKen or Hunchback, we find people that are better or knowing it better than us in certain disciplines. So it could be composers, and I'm a composer myself as well, but no, I love if I find a composer that can say, no, we can do this like this. And it sounds just 10 times better than I could ever imagine. That's what we really love. That's what we really like to do. So if you come to a term where you create something in a studio and you see, this person, like I can still do it better, I hate that feeling. And I think that's a little bit of a different way that people did it back in the day, or when people have like a little bit of a more inflated ego. They like to always hold that control of being better or knowing it better. That's not so much what I like or how we are running the company.
Okay, yeah. Seems reasonable. Delivers the Moon was your, like you said, your first big debut game, and it's soon getting like a I don't know if you can call it a sequel, but a new game that's called Delivers Mars, which works in a similar way, but has a different story. Can you tell us a bit about Delivers Mars and how it came to be, why you decided to put out another one?
Yeah, no, Deliver Us Mars. We have always tried to maximize our ambition. So it's all has to do with the amount of resources you have. That's money, that's people, that it's whatever you can do to your reality. And where Deliver Us the Moon really set the tone in kind of what we wanted, this whole symbiosis between all these disciplines, level design, programming, music, sound design, visuals, cinema, all this stuff kind of came together in that. We did hit a roof, and we had a very rocky road in kind of running the company, kind of almost went bankrupt and then barely survived and just scratching things together and then eventually make it work. While now with Deliver Us Mars, we go even further in that ambition. So everything that we wanted to tell this huge sci-fi adventure game in space, kind of grounded, now we can even go further. So by telling the story, the drama, now we actually use facial animations. We did use mocap to record kind of the real performance to make this drama really come to life. And not only that, like also on the gameplay, we can go further. Then also the length of the game is longer. So the game soundtrack of Deliver Us the Moon was, for example, already 60 to 70 tracks, which is a lot for the game that we made.
Oh yeah,
around a 5 to 6 hour experience. Now we are going way longer. So people wanted more of a game like that. People wanted to stay in that atmosphere. So I think we are pushing it on every boundary. So on animation, on gameplay, game lengths, play by play, how you go through the game, composition of music, adaptive music. It's an extreme spectacle. Nothing that we have done before. Definitely that.
Okay. And talking about the game music or the game soundtrack, how would the music composition process for Delivers the Moon compare to the new Delivers Mars game? What were you able to take over from one project to the other, and which were the points where you said, so we be going a different route here for this new game?
So we have a dedicated composer for it. We early on figured out like running a company and especially like two companies. And then also creating the music and be completely dedicated. That's not how you can do it. Or sure, you could do it, but you want a specific time to be dedicated to that, like the love and care that it needs. So early on, we work with Sander van Zanten. He's doing the composition and soundtrack for Deliver Us the Moon, but then also for Mars because he's there and it worked. I remember from Deliver Us the Moon that we went kind of a little bit of a different route where in the beginning it sounded more like a fairy tale. And we said, that's not really where the direction we needed to go for. So we changed that into a more minimalistic approach to say we need to stay closer to the feelings that a player needs to go through, or maybe implying certain feelings, let people decide how they feel for themselves, but insinuating certain ideas and atmospheres. And that's kind of how the soundtrack came to be. Long process, lots of iterations, lots of work that we needed to throw away. Also, mainly because we were just inexperienced to create it. And eventually it came together into this symbiosis, which is Deliver Us the Moon. And of course, by making this next step to the sequel, we didn't want to just copy paste, and just like, okay, we did this. We already have the sound palette. Let's go with this. So we tried to redefine it, but then as well have familiar stuff that people know and love from the original soundtrack. Kind of go a little bit further than that, a little bit more deeper. And I think the whole setting, the whole story, the whole kind of space opera that we're telling now lends itself as well to go a little bit more in extremes in music.
Okay, so speaking of the story of the new game, can you already tell us a bit about the story? Of course, there's the trailer, and it hints at some interesting points. But and we talk about that trailer later on. But are there any like, is there like a story arc or a story part of the story you can already share with us, or is it secret?
I actually can. I know. So for marketing reasons, as kind of many composers would know that maybe read something like this is there is a lot of like marketing beats, and you need to be very careful what you share. I think the people that know Deliver Us the Moon, they will be pleasant surprised by how far we take the story and how we deepen kind of all the characters out. Maybe a very broad way. It's always about being an astronaut. It's always about it's maybe what I can say is that it's a very intimate story of a family as well into this huge podium, which is the Among the Stars. Mm-hmm. So it's Among the Stars family drama.
Okay.
That's as far as I can tell you.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of being among the stars, I imagine being a composer myself, getting the tasks of creating sounds, or both a sound designer and composer, creating the sounds and music to a scene or to a story that plays in sort of like total vacuum, or like some place where not much sound is actually perceivable. I would think if I would get that task, I would definitely start to tremble a bit, because this is, I think, quite a difficult task. How did you go about like creating sound and creating music, but sound specifically, sound effects, sound design, for a game that plays somewhere where you have to like imagine the sounds that you could hear there, because there's no reference or examples of how it sounds up there on Mars?
I have to speak for Sander at this point. In the beginning, of course, we had the sound palette, so we made, it was more kind of like a music direction that we said we wanted this to be. Mm-hmm. But then again, it's very important to us with the people that we work with that we give them the complete freedom at one point to say, okay, you got it. We set the borders between these brackets, but now fill it in yourself. And that's what Sander did. I would say, to speak for him a little bit and also for myself in creation, is I think we all kind of suffer from the imposter syndrome. So every time you start with the blank slate, you are looking at it and you're like, how do I do this again? Yeah. So you start with a sound, and some people dream of melodies, some people dream of kind of complete sound palettes. How we do it most of the time is we create it from a sound. So we start off maybe with an atmosphere. We start off with a certain drone where we're like, hey, this is interesting. And one sound inspires the next, and the other sound inspires that. So every step of the way is kind of inspiring your next step. And I think this is kind of what somebody said once. It's like, where does creativity come from? I think somebody said when the pencil hits the paper. And we really believe in that sense. It's a very practical way of creativity, is please just hit the notes on the piano and go from there. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's the most practical way how maybe other composers can take it from it, is don't overthink it. And we all suffer from that little voice in the head that tells you like, maybe this time you will not understand how it works anymore.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's because you're stuck between like repeating all the stuff you did before and doing something so out there that people don't get it anymore, or people like compare to the predecessor game and say, what did you do there with the music? So you have to strike a balance between that.
It's maybe a good reference is Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan makes movies that are the concepts of the movies are quite complicated and sometimes quite intellectual. But he tells them on a very Hollywood way, which a lot of people understand. It's just an explosion here. You have like beautiful cinematic shots, grandiose music from Hans Zimmer playing. And I think this is kind of the way a composer should think sometimes as well. It's like, sure, you can tell a story on a very deep level, like on the music and deep layers of what you want to portray in deep harmonies. But then also take in consideration that you need to make it kind of, it depends a little bit on the project, of course, but if you are shooting for a wider audience, then also try to communicate it to a wider audience. Mm-hmm. Not saying that you should never underestimate your audience in that sense. But sure, if it's too complicated and you're saying, okay, there's only maybe 1% that would understand this, then maybe you should reconsider the composition.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about the sound, the sound effects part of the game, did you actually record some of the sounds, or maybe all of the sounds yourself, or did you make use of like commercially available sounds to fill the picture?
I would love to go to space and record a few things. It would be quite hard with this vacuum.
Yeah.
So no, but definitely if there's any big entrepreneurs, SpaceX, if they're listening in, well, you got an attendee here. I love to go to space. No, but sure, we use kind of everything to our disposal. So a lot of things were kind of foleyed up, something on a very ghetto way in the beginning when we didn't have the right amount of budgets. Then we just used anything that we have. Didn't matter if the microphone was cheap or expensive, anything to our disposal to get the sound that we wanted. Sometimes it was sample libraries that we could use. So we bought the license and used it, or even stuff that we could use on the get-go, or we synthesized it. Mm-hmm. Now we go pretty far because we have bigger budgets, so we couldn't actually do that. We have a specific sound designer that's extremely good at synthesizing things. So, for example, we needed to get this rocket sound. And of course, there's a lot of sample libraries that get that little fluttering kind of wind sound. It's kind of distorting the microphone. If you record this in real life, your microphone will probably explode. So maybe that's not the best thing to do. So he synthesized it. And funny enough, it sounded very realistic. And that's, of course, how we create a lot of these things is we want to make it as realistic as you think it will be realistic. It not necessarily is realistic,
yeah,
but it sounds like, if you think about it, it would sound like that. If you then hear the original thing, how it should sound, like, hey, that's actually quite different.
Yeah.
Perceptual creation.
Yeah, indeed. I think as a sound designer, it's so often that you come to a point where if you finally listen to the actual sound, then it's oftentimes underwhelming. Like perfect example would be like a gunshot or something like that, which sounds like don't know, kicking a cardboard box or so, and then compare it to a gunshot which is designed for a movie or for a game, which sounds totally over the top, right?
Out of proportion, but
yes,
it's not so good. And you think it sounds like that.
This was an eye opener for me when I started dabbling around with recording sounds and processing sounds, and I came to the conclusion that you don't need to actually record a airplane crashing to generate the sound of a airplane crashing, right? So you can put up all those layers underneath of each other, record different sounds, even record household objects you have at home with your mobile recorder, and through processing and editing, make them into something huge that can be heard in movies, and nobody would have expected that this is actually, I don't know, like your cat meowing in the background or something like that. And
now, very much agree. I do think, and especially if I talk to like younger composers and they say, like, yeah, but I don't have like all these expensive libraries or tools.
Yeah.
You really don't need that. Like at one point, you just have a basic recorder, a laptop, and combine that with synthesis, Foley stuff. This whole combination, and of course, use these effects. And you don't need this extremely expensive effects right away, but even sometimes the factory settings can do such an incredible job, especially nowadays, where things become easier access than ever to do it. So I think for the sound design part, it's a complete combination between synthesized, Foley, samples. It's that combination. And that's we just create it together. And sometimes it will be a little bit more of the one thing than the other thing.
Okay. Is these two things like sound and music, is this created like in tandem and at the same time, or do you have first the soundtrack to the game and create and implement the sounds then, or how do you go about creating a soundscape, including music and sound for such a game like Deliver's Mars?
I would say you can kind of have a little bit more category. So you have the composition, that's kind of the gameplay composition. You could say the cinematic composition. This is kind of the music creation of it. You also have kind of atmosphere design. So think about the environments and stuff. You also have the sound design. You have the sound implementation, which can also, you have that. So it's kind of little tools like the F mode you can use, or Wise for a lot of people. It's kind of the aggregator between the programmer and the composer to kind of try to make this world a little bit more simple. That's kind of what it is. You also have kind of the way a environment sounds, so kind of the reverb, the delays that a certain cave would have. How would you call that? Atmosphere, reverb, tone designer. So all these things have a lot, and especially the game that we are creating is asking more and more. So we are now working with a temporary team as well that works specifically on the sound design. This is somebody who made, for example, the soundtrack for Horizon. He's helping us out now as well. Then we have a specific sound designer that really makes everything sound as good as possible. It's and the production of this kind of went straight on. So when we had the story, when we are kind of blocking it out, which is called white box and gray box. So when you first kind of make the skeleton of the piece, kind of like arranging music. You first make the skeleton, or at least sometimes how I work, or how the composers work. After that, you say, okay, we need a little bit more of the organs into it. Then you have kind of like all the arteries. Then you need to also have the skin to it. And step by step, you go into this polish mode where kind of it's just only about the smallest of details. And the same thing we did with the music. So very widely, we kind of spread out this like tone palette over the game, over the white box. And we said, like, okay, we already define a little bit more here and there, which is more for gray box parts. And it's the same happens with the music, from skeleton to organs to make it a little bit better. And sometimes when you really got into the flow, you go a little bit further than that. So it doesn't only stay with the skeleton, but you just got the flow and you already made a bigger piece there. And occasionally you have to throw that away because it didn't really fit that cinematic, or the cinematic was way shorter. So it's a very iterative process.
Okay. And I imagine this is true for like most of the games, but especially for a game like yours, which is very story driven, and where you have situations where you have like puzzles or have to figure things out and be focused on a certain task. How would you go about, or how would you and your team go about creating music that is both immersing the player, but also doesn't get in the way of focusing on a task, or focusing on a story? How do you strike the balance of that?
So I think if you really want to go in depth, you should definitely talk to our composer Sander van Zanten. We can arrange that, no problem. He would love that as well. But what we did is we use adaptive music. So because we have a little bit of a different game than this kind of linear, like on a movie, for example, it's synced. So you have a scene, that's it. So on like a cinematic in our game, that will always be the same. Everybody sees that 1.5 minute cinematic that we have into the game. The music can be can be written synced to that. In these gameplay elements, the player actually is remixing what you're doing, or at least that's how we would design it. So, or you choose to make a piece of music, let's say in minutes, and you just let it go and repeat. It just loops. So some sort of atmosphere with no really beginning, no really an ending, and just loops. We said we wanted a little bit more. Eventually, you get that. So if you're playing the game, you get that. Okay, there's a loop on. Somebody left the repeat button on. So we try to iterate with some adaptive chords as well. So the chords will just be playing random at certain points into the same scale that we are doing that level. I think the whole score was been written in one key just for that sake, to make it more easy to get into other loops, line in other moments where it's like, okay, you are getting a little ahead of another player. Let's say you're faster, then you also need to time that music faster. So in a way, you want it synchronized, but you want it synchronized to the progression of the player. So it's kind of, in a way, loops or kind of adaptive chords that make you think that there's a song kind of constantly changing a little bit, but it is the same piece. And of course, if you want to build up to something, there are certain key moments that trigger that little bit more of that extra tense in the music. So, okay, now you're almost there. We want it a little bit more tense. So layer X, come along here.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay, cool. So let's get away from the game itself for a moment and talk about the game trailer for Deliverers Mars, because as far as I could get it, you also, as Hunchback Music, did the trailer music for your own game, so to say.
Yeah, and it's kind of a funny thing, right? So normally trailer music is made because the composer doesn't have time for it because they're so busy developing a movie soundtrack or a game soundtrack. In this case, yeah, of course, because we have such a symbiosis going between two companies, we said like we want to do it ourselves. And we always know that we need to make it a little bit bigger than what the soundtrack is. So it needs to sell something. I think we went for the first one. We actually took it quite atmospheric. That has more impact on the sound design. So especially kind of the moment you see like a pod kind of being crash down on the Mars surface. It's an introduction of kind of like, oh, we are on Mars. You see somebody walking, kind of leads up to a few moments that people know from our previous game. So we have some kind of like hidden like sound effects in there. We go, oh, that's kind of the thing that I remember. Kind of builds up to a moment, to a title reveal. Kind of a straightforward trailer in that sense. But we had lots of fun just creating it. And especially because we also did the trailer itself in-house. So not only the music, but also the video. For the next ones, we are working with some other people also to give a little bit of a different perspective. Not only to do it yourself. It's kind of like music, doing the master yourself. You could do it. But it's always nice to get that second opinion because they have this different perspective on your piece of creation.
Absolutely. And they are totally unbiased and didn't work on this track like for 3 weeks in a row, right?
Exactly. So in a way, I don't think it's bad that sometimes you do your own master, or in this case, we did our own trailer. Yeah. Sometimes you want a little bit of a difference. So we try to spice it up. So we have a trailer in between where we actually asked for another company to actually create the cuts and stuff. And we use it with some music. So we are licensing some music for this specific one. And then we have another trailer that we are doing the music again. So we're spicing things up. Most in the likes because we want to collaborate with more people. Mm-hmm. So there's just a few wishes. Sometimes we want to work with X and I can't say who it is. Okay. But sometimes it's also just a boy's wish to say, wouldn't it be cool if we can work with these people?
Absolutely, yeah.
And we try to make it happen.
Cool. And since you're an experienced composer for like trailer music and work for different movie production companies or TV production companies, what would you say? Is it harder to create trailer music for your own project, or is it easier because you know everything the game is about and you know the story it wants to tell in those 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes?
Good question. I think that it's easier to create something for somebody else. Because I think it's the emotional attachment to your own creation. So while the own creation, especially a game, is being created by so many disciplines. So you can't have your ownership on one thing. It's like everybody has a little piece. So in that sense, sure, it's a big project. I do think that sometimes it's nicer to not have that emotional value to it yet. But I have to say that mostly if we do something for other companies, custom, or even if it's production music, it quite fast becomes emotionally attached to us. But yes, I think in a general sense, I would say if you do something that's not yours from the get-go, it's easier to create just because you think a little bit more experimental. You think a little bit more outside of the box because you dare to. And with the other one, you feel restricted because it needs to get a certain point, or you really want to portray that certain emotion. And when you really want something, a lot of times it can be like a little bit missed or a little bit forced. Maybe that's not really well said, but in that sense that if you create something and you need to get that horror feeling, then you're kind of also forcing it upon you. But when you really want to do it for yourself and you want to get that certain emotion, I don't think that you let fate and kind of the iteration of the reality decide what it will be. And you're kind of forcing something in a direction that's maybe very good, but it could also be shit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. So being a trailer music composer myself, I think I listen to the music of such a trailer a bit differently than, let's say, the typical gamer or someone who's interested in only playing the game. What I really liked about your trailer music, of course, in combination with the video, is that you didn't go for the obvious things, that you didn't go for the big drums, the big hits, the, I don't know, screeching trailer risers and stuff, but you painted a very atmospheric picture, which presented a certain type of suspense and unease, so to say, but without being like in your face with a hammer in your face, right? And this is something I find quite daring, because many trailers nowadays work, as you know best, in a certain structure, and you always try as a composer to like bend those structures, but you have to keep in there to place your music.
I have to say it depends. So, for example, we will have a lot of trailers for the game. So we will go for the bombastic, traditional one where you're like, okay, Hollywood is open again. I think I like to have, and it depends. So sometimes you're pitching for a project and they want a traditional hybrid, go boom, give me the Inception Brahm, please do. Yeah. And that's fine. And sometimes the traditional thing just works. And I know, because we are like part of it, you as well, we kind of like this experimental approach. So I saw this trailer, Raw. I think it's a very indie movie, and they went completely sound designy, rhythmic, but perfectly aligned. They went also for this like drum riff that's kind of like a last riff or like a begin riff before kind of a climax would hit in a rock song. And they cut like the image on it. And I thought like, yeah, that's very experimental. But then again, this was an indie movie that kind of could go for that. I kind of like that they dared to do that. And especially with horror movie, they dared to go a little bit extreme and weird. While, of course, if you make a huge blockbuster and there's like 160 million into it, I can imagine that you want, especially one very traditional one, just go boom. Maybe one more emotional one to hit a little bit of these people. And then maybe one, if you dare to, like very strange experimental. And we will do the same. So, yeah, there will be people saying like, oh, but I saw this trailer of Deliver Us Mars and this is like complete boom and complete bombastic. And I hope you like it. And if you don't, then there will be other trailers.
Cool. Yeah, very looking forward to seeing those trailers, those upcoming trailers. Next question. I don't know if you would be the right person to ask, because like you said, some of these very specific questions would be more suited to your composer who's working on the project. But in general, I don't know if you, being a CEO and co-director on the game project or game development project, how much time you actually spend in a studio, in a recording studio, producing music yourself nowadays?
It's really it really depends on the project. So I think we are in I call it a luxurious position to say, let's choose it or not. Like I rather just want somebody that's really trying and starting and super talented to go for it. Then again, if I really want to dive something, I really want to pick something myself, kind of like, oh, this is a perfect fit. Sure, then I have the choice to say, you know what, this one I will take on me. But then even then, if I would choose that, then I will always let somebody else write something completely opposite from what I'm writing. So we have like two concepts. So if it's a pitch or it's a custom piece of music that we need to create, we do. And especially the trailer music that we're releasing, we're doing this in a collective. So most of the time it's like 8 tracks or 6 till 10 tracks that we release on these trailer albums. I try to be part of it, but eventually I will let the wheel be taken by all the composers that we have. I also think it's great that if you're running the company and you are a director in whatever sense, it's actually great if you speak from practical experience. You know what it is. You know the discipline. You can be compassionate about every little step somebody is taking. You know what they're up to. You know how many hours they put in something. You know how hard it is to kill your darlings. You know the process from being rejected, like all these things. And that's what my brother and I always did. So on the games or in the music, I think it's great that we know what it is, and also that we eventually wanting to be surpassed by the people that we hire. And maybe that's not something a lot of people do, but that's how life is. Eventually, if you want it or not, we are all getting older. At one point, there will always be somebody better than you. So rather kind of join forces and do something nice together.
Yeah, I think that's the only way of like succeeding as a creative person, is working with other people, giving other people the chance to shine, collaborate, and put like different strengths to a common goal, right? To join the forces, so to say.
Maybe good to say is like there's this whole trend with all these coaches. So a coach is giving another coach advice how to be a coach, coach to be, and then you have like this whole kind of loop down into doing something. And then at one point it's like, did these coaches actually do a practice in this discipline? And a lot of times it's no. And I would say to people, if you want some advice of people, go to people that actually did something in that field. If you want to build a bridge, go probably to somebody that already built a bridge that is standing there for a few years. Not somebody that pretends to have the theory on it. They never did it, but they seem to know everything about it. Feels a little bit more sketchy. So therefore, I think it's great that that we are running a company, but knowing the discipline. We know how it is. We know to an extent. For example, I never really stood for an orchestra, but we do have composers that know exactly fine line between like making the score and transferring like the software score, the MIDI score into a score that's on paper, and then actually directing it in front of a whole orchestra. So yeah, there will be extents where composers have way more knowledge than I myself have. You can still have the compassion for anything that's in that field if you have been there.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for the few final questions, please feel free to stop me if that's not your department. But as you would know, being creative, working in a studio, being a composer is only one part. Being creative, and maybe the other one like running the actual business. But a lot of us are like real tech heads, and we like to talk about equipment and microphones and stuff. So, like I just said, if that isn't your department at all, let me know. But are there, if you are in the studio, if you're actually producing music, are there any particular tools you like to use on a regular basis? Are there any favorites? Are there any secret pieces of equipment you like to use?
Secret weapons.
Yeah.
I would say always use anything to your disposal, and especially if it's in the most convenient way to use it. So if you have an idea and you just have a laptop in front of you, then use that laptop. If you're in the studio, like I have some synthesizers on the sides. If I don't get to the desired result at one point when I'm in the box, I'm in my DAW, I'm in Ableton, and I just don't get it done, then I probably would fire up one of the synthesizers and say like, oh, let's go for my Korg Poly 61 to get a little bit more of this vintage vibe going on. Or even though if it's a digital synthesizer, I have a Novation bass station, for example. Quite cheap, very easy to step in for new composers. I think it's like around $300 to get something like that. And it's a digital synthesizer. You can get exactly this part out of your software. Although the physical way on touching these things sometimes spark that idea where you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. And you might not even use the sound that came out from it, but it's just a different form on getting creativity out. So sure, I can say some microphones that I use or some synthesizers, and I love Moog, and but I don't think that's actually the best advice I can give. I would say if it doesn't work on the one way, then try another way. And if it's the microphone, don't blame it on the quality of the microphone, unless it's completely broken and you throw it out the window or something, then probably it doesn't record very well anymore. Also, I heard some people about more the techie part, like about like the sample rates and about stuff. And I most of the time say to people, just listen to it. And even if it's lower quality, man, one of the biggest pop songs are now created just under like a mattress, like something like with a blanket over the head.
In a hotel bedroom.
Right. And sometimes like things get super famous for being extremely bad recorded because the distortion was a certain way, or it was being compressed so loud that it's became kind of like a natural ducking effect, you know?
Yeah.
And experiment with that. So I can steer you a direction. I love Moog. I love Korg. I'm a big fan of the Arturia section on software. This is kind of like more musical synthesizers. Big fan of FabFilter. FabFilter is just great to clean up my mix.
Dutch company, by the way.
Yeah, so good promotion for that. A big fan of what was it called again? I like Signal a lot. Sorry, now it's called Output. Output has some very interesting software that can get you going when you're like, I need a little bit of inspiration. It has some very cool sound effects. Of course, a native instrument is just like the basics. So when you start and you can get your hands on like a complete edition, I think you are well set to experiment with many sounds they have to offer in the Contact library. Is that giving you a little bit of a palette in what I use, what I like?
Absolutely. So putting it all together, you would say that it's more important to really know the gear you're using, and if it's the cheapest stuff, if you know it, you can use it. It isn't about like having everything at your disposal. It's about knowing the stuff you have at your disposal, right?
I think so. So it's at least if you have like, especially with software and all the VST and all the synths that you can own, if you have everything and it's kind of addicting to have it because you're like, oh, this is this new thing, and you can kind of lose your time into that.
Yeah.
But also all these choices kind of brings you further from creating. So what you were saying is right. Just keep it kind of confined and work with the stuff that you really think are great. And then occasionally, let's say there's more of a unique sidestep where like, oh, we want this very, we want this specifically recorded music box, and you don't have a music box to your disposal. Sure, you can get a library, and maybe that's $20, and you do that specific sound with that Contact library.
Yeah,
that's kind of how we do it. So if there's something very specific requested from us, and we don't have it to our disposal, or we can't synthesize it in a certain way, or record it, then we go into like, is there a solution to solve this with an extra library? But try to stay away from it if you can.
Okay.
A lot of money.
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's just interesting to talk about that for me because I lately found that I've got a composing template of over 1,000 tracks, I guess, and lately I've been trying to slim it down progressively. And I think Christian Hansen from Spitfire Audio was one of the first one, at least for me, who coined that term of starving yourself of resources to be creative. Don't have 1,000 different string sample libraries on there. Just have one and try to work with that. And if that doesn't work, you can still load up new stuff. But having just a few tools at your disposal helps to be creative or enhances your creativity instead of having everything and each thing at your disposal at the same time, because this can be like paralyzing.
More. It's really that. It's and funny for him to say because he's selling these things. So so it would be great if he said, "No, that's actually pretty good if you have more." You know, more options.
Starve yourself of resources, but not with our company.
Just use Spitfire, then you're good. But it's I think I've seen him. I'm not sure if I actually talked to him, but there was a conference. A very honest man. I like that. I think that's a very well said thing. Just neglect yourself from too much choice. It's kind of the supermarket choice, right? You need to buy a bar of soap. Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that now would be my final question. I always ask this question the people I talk to is what would be your number one tip you would give to an aspiring composer who wants to join the music trailer music business or even the game music business?
I think to everybody, it's always about doing. The secret to life is doing it, not to be in your head about it, not about thinking about doing it. I will start tomorrow. I wish I would do, if I'm older, I will do X. Now, and it can be the smallest thing. It can be just, yeah, but I don't know how this program works. Just dive into Logic, dive into Ableton, write a little bit every day. It can be even 5 minutes. Just get into it and don't think about doing, just do it and iterate on it. And make sure that you constantly iterate, and also ask yourself the question if you like it. There's many things I tried and that I did a long time where I eventually said, you know what, this is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can only discover by doing. And I think success is built up from failure, not from the amount of times you win. It's maybe 90% failure, 10% win. And that's actually what builds up. And the amount of wins are actually not that educational. If you win and it just goes right, then you're like, okay, great. And the times you actually know, that's quite interesting. How can we do that better? And it also tests your perseverance. How much do you really want it?
Yeah, very well said. Thank you. So, Paul, that would be all from my side for the moment. And thank you very much for taking the time. I had a blast talking to you guys. And thank you so much. And Godspeed with your upcoming project. I'm super excited to see the new trailers and listen to the sound, listen to the music you put in there. And yeah, all the best for your upcoming projects.
Thank you. Appreciate that.